back then that I remember. Like it was more of that drive for perfection and that drive for work harder, do more, burn the candle at both ends, right? Like that was that's how I grew up. And I grew up in a family business. So I feel like my work style was even more like magnified because I was used to, we had to take care of it because we owned the business, right? Nobody else was there going to do it for us. And so having that, like giving ourselves that break is it's something that I just think that it's easy to forget. It's a simple thing that we can do for ourselves, but it's easy to forget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've had people reminding me now for years that it is my Achilles heel is taking on too much.
Yeah. Yeah. I get that completely. So let's go to the book. Is there any story or anything in the book that you want to share with the listeners today, or any, like your favorite story, or maybe even a favorite lesson that you put in the book?
And I just want to be transparent that you probably asked me this a while back when we were kind of preparing for this podcast, and I don't remember what I responded with.
Well, in what you were telling the story about when you were with the therapist and you described the shoes, like, and then I think your husband was with you, and then when you were getting, they were taking you away. So I don't know if you want to go into that, but I thought it was pretty profound, that part that you sent.
Yeah. So that's the prologue to the memoir. Is it was basically, I had kind of just like a big breakdown. I think it used to be called like a nervous breakdown. Like sort of my elders called it that, your elders.
Yeah.
But I think, now looking back, what that really means is like people had a serious crisis, like something was happening to the point that they needed psychiatric care. And we might call those things now depression or PTSD or, other labels, diagnoses. So this was my first big breakdown, and I had not been doing well for a while due to an unexpected trauma. And I was so unwell that I requested to be put on antidepressants. Like I went to my doctor and I was basically like, I can't do this anymore. Like, help me. So I started taking an SSRI, like many people have and do. And my sort of brain chemistry response to it was what they call more of a bipolar response versus sort of a unipolar depression, where an SSRI, like what I was taking, over time builds up in the system and people start to feel better.
Okay.
But what happened to me is a few weeks in, I was having highs and lows, more so than I had ever experienced in my life. The lows particularly. I had definitely had depression, but I had never had suicidal thoughts. And suddenly I was having what we call intrusive suicidal thoughts, where they just come out of nowhere. And it's like, why am I thinking about this? But suddenly I am, thinking about doing serious harm to myself. So that built up over time. And again, to talk about like perfectionism, I don't know. I think I just thought, I can deal with this. Like whatever, it's just side effects. I'm not going to give it too much merit. I don't want to, make a big fuss or draw attention to it. It'll pass. And it didn't. It just got worse and worse. And got to the point where I did require psychiatric attention. And so, I was in kind of a triage room. And a therapist came in and basically told me I was being admitted under a 5150, which is an involuntary hospitalization, which is a 3-day hold, 72 hours. And it was sort of like, everything just like completely broke apart. That's the
Mm-hmm.
best way I can describe it, is like the life that I thought I was living was just sort of, it just like crumbled.
Yeah.
And that's how I felt, like I was just crumbling, and nothing, like everything I thought I knew about myself and about the world and about what I thought I knew changed.
Yeah.
And then it really has been a process of figuring out that we don't, once things change, like, and we all have these kinds of changes in our lives, you know, a loss or a trauma or a marriage, a childbirth, you know, like all these different things that happen to us as humans, we are not ever the same person that we used to be.
Yeah.
And I felt, and I've heard my clients say so many times, I just want to go back to the old me.
Yeah.
I just, like, why can't I feel the way I used to? What's wrong with me? And I went through that process for years of like, this is wrong. And I think that's why I fought the diagnosis too. It was like, no, this is wrong. This isn't who I used to be. I just need to get back to that person.
Right.
And that the prologue of the memoir, I chose that as the prologue because it really was the moment when everything cracked and fell apart.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, talking about that and that feeling of wanting to go back to who we used to be, right? When we have these changes, and as you said, it could be anything, right? It could be a positive change even, or trauma, or, you know, a terrible event that happened. But it feels like and I felt this in my own life, how I've wanted to, like I've resisted the change, and I felt like somehow I should be able to go through all these things and remain static, remain the same. And I don't know why I ever had that thought or that feeling. But so then when an event would happen, whatever, let's even use a positive event, then I would like be fighting the change of it, even though it was the thing that I said that I wanted. Right. And then and we spend a lot of time and energy fighting within ourselves on the change, because we don't want the change, because we, like, to me, it felt like, oh, I must be doing something wrong that I'm changing. But it's in fact the opposite. The change is what gets us to the thing that we want. And that breaking point, like you experienced, or that where we feel like we're trying to fight to get back to something that we're never going to be again. I mean, there's that loss of self, or that loss of that old me, that I think also that's something that doesn't get talked about a lot, about how to actually deal with that, how to manage that. I'm no longer this person. And so this is what it means going forward.
Yes. Yeah, it doesn't. I think, you know, and now that we're in the digital age, and I mean, and I think people are starting to be more authentic on social media somewhat, at least of my generation. But then I see, you know, there's a lot of folks there, you know, their image is about maybe something more surface, or more what you see rather than what's inside. And so I think, people do see personas or influencers or whoever in this static way, and it's not a true representation of the human experience. Right.
And so then we are up against this ideal, or this perceived perfection that isn't even real to begin with anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, totally. I don't know anybody who has it all together.
Right. Well, right. And that's the other part of it, right? What I loved about your message and your, you know, what you talk about, and what you're really saying at the end there is about how we don't have to be I mean, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. This is the way I understood it, was about just that importance of self-acceptance. Like, you know, it's okay to accept yourself, plain and simple. It's okay to accept yourself. And that, I feel like that sometimes maybe we think we know what self-acceptance is until we go through an event, something happens, and then we are really there in the situation, and it's like, can I really accept myself here? I can accept myself when I feel good and everything's going great, but can I really accept myself when something happens that I don't want, or that I don't like, or trauma, or some other terrible thing? Can I really accept myself here and be able to move on from that?
Yeah. And I really felt that, particularly that first hospitalization. It was just, it was like, I don't know how to do this.
Yeah. Right.
I am usually the person on the opposite side of this.
Right.
And that just contributed to the shame.
Yeah.
That I do think, helping professionals and mental health professionals, we can be the hardest on ourselves.
Yeah.
And there's actually somewhat of a stigma, and I think it's getting better, but there kind of is a stigma among mental health professionals to not be our clients or not be our patients. And that is such a false reality, because most people who are drawn to the mental health field have had a significant experience themselves.
Right.
And that where they needed help.
Right. And then it's like it separates you as if you can't be like you're somehow not part of the human experience as everybody else, right? It like separates you from that.
Yeah. And I particularly really enjoy working with young people, like kind of in that transition from teenage to adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk about how therapy they use a stereotype, like an older white woman. And I think that's like a sort of the stereotypical therapist that dominated in the field for a long time. And now I think we're starting to see many more identities represented in the therapy profession. But, that's sort of the stereotype of what they expected. And then they experienced that. And I've heard multiple times, like, I don't want somebody to just sit there and listen to me and nod their head. Like, I want somebody who gets it. And I don't even need to know why they get it. I just need to know that they get it. And I need to know that, like, they're not just going to sit and stare at me, that they're going to really engage with me and talk about the really hard stuff without getting scared or getting weird or, immediately talking about like, well, we need to, get you to the hospital or whatever.
Right. Yes. And I've talked about that a lot on the show here, my own experience with therapy. And, sometimes it takes a couple therapists. You go through, maybe the first one you try doesn't work. But that doesn't mean therapy doesn't work, right? It just, that person wasn't a good fit for you. And I've talked about that a lot on the show, about how if you're willing to do that and work through and get somebody that you feel comfortable with and that meets the needs that you're looking for, I mean, it opens up a completely different world, because you're seeing, like, whenever I went to a new therapist, I've said, I want you to tell me what I can't see. There's things here about this that I know I cannot see, and I want you to help me to see that. And that, going in with that openness, I think too, really, really helps. At least it's helped me to be able to be honest with what's really going on inside of me, as well, because a lot of times, as our generation, we don't want to talk about the things for the very reasons you said, the stigmas or the whatever it might be. But going in and being willing to be open and honest to me, it's been life changing.
Yeah. And, I think the reality is that we were raised by a generation that came out of 2 world wars, and in the United States, the Great Depression, and then civil rights. And, like, there were so many big dramatic things that happened in the lives of the generation that, brought us into the world or raised us, that there wasn't really room to like break down in a way that people could hold or talk about. It was like, it had to be kept secret. And I think because it was already, like, life was already so difficult anyway. Right. And nobody really, it just wasn't passed down. It was like
there wasn't
in the
time
family, or no time for feelings, or like, don't, what happens in this family stays in this family, or, the various different things. And I think also that, like I said, the field for a long time was dominated by, first white men, and then white men and, cisgender white men and women. And